I'm Bryan Hyde, and I'm telling it like it is.
Boy, if there's ever been a sacred cow, public education is the sacred cow, at least here in the state of Utah. For some reason, anytime a person questions the public education system, almost guaranteed someone is going to say, "You're against education itself." So right up front, I want to assure you, I'm not against education. In fact, if there's anything that our country needs right now, it is education. It's people who can think clearly and think independently. Now, having said that, how many people really know about the origins of public education, not just in Utah, but in the United States? I'd wager that a lot of people that very, very strongly support it don't have a clue as to its history, its origins, or its goals. So I'm going to walk you through the process and see if you feel the same way about the public education system as you did before we started. We have to go back to the early 1800s. At that time, the superintendent, or actually the secretary of education in the Boston area schools, was a gentleman by the name of Horace Mann. And he had heard about these wonderful schools in Europe, specifically in Prussia, where they were so organized, and they actually took what he called unruly, meaning independent children, and turned them into straightforward, judicious citizens. And he thought, that sounds good. So he went over, he studied the Prussian system, and he loved what he saw. Now you have to understand, the Prussian system had some very specific goals that it set out to do. It was instituted by tyrants, like Frederick Wilhelm I, or even Napoleon liked that same type of system, because what they wanted was a populace, they wanted masses that weren't too inclined to think too independently. In other words, people that were fairly easy to control. So to that end, they instituted a public school system that took education out of the hands of the parents and the church and put it in the hands of the state. And they did this for 5 specific reasons. One, they wanted obedient workers for the mines. Secondly, they wanted obedient soldiers for the army. Third, they wanted what they called well-subordinated civil servants for government. Fourth, they wanted well-subordinated clerks for industry. And fifth, this is the most interesting of all, they wanted citizens who thought alike about major issues. Well, Horace Mann, as well as other ideological leaders in America at that time, fell in love with this idea. And they brought it back to the states, and they endlessly sought to have the states institute this. In fact, in the name of equality, as in we're going to educate the masses, we're going to make sure that everybody has an equal education, they sold it to the states. In fact, they didn't just sell it to the states, they got the states to enact it as part of a compulsory, mandated system that every single student had to attend. That's the origins of our public education system. Now, we don't think of that when we see schools today. To look at the schools today, few people would make the connection, wow, this had its roots in some very authoritarian premises. But it did. And you have to ask yourself, has it had the effect of making us good workers? I would say that it has. Has it had the effect of bringing people pretty much in line to where there are acceptable boundaries of what we can talk about or where opinions can be on most major issues? I'd have to say, yeah. It's pretty easy to find yourself on the fringes simply by thinking outside of the box. So here's the deal. I'm not condemning the teachers who work within the public education system. I have family members who work in public education. I've had teachers, I went through the public education system, who inspired me, who helped me become a better person because they were educators in the truest sense of the word. The fact that they were able to do this in a system that has authoritarian foundations is even more to their credit. But when you understand the whole basic premise of making a people that are more easily controlled, that are more obedient, and that are more suited to simply find their place in life, we call it a job. The public education system is fulfilling its mission beautifully. This doesn't mean you need to turn your back on it, but you should at least be aware that it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. One of the most disturbing things about public education is the fact that the people who defend it most strongly believe that any alternative to public education is a hindrance at best, or at worst, some kind of antisocial threat to society in general. Why do we think that way? I tend to believe it's because we've been taught to. I'm Bryan Hyde. I'm telling it like it is.